Look at that. Power of silence. Welcome in everybody to the AGM marking the year 2018 and 19. Pretty poignant that we meet this week, which coincides with the biggest week of domestic racing in New Zealand. I've been to Cup and Show Week probably 3 times, and 3 of the most memorable weeks I've had. And the fact we've got the New Zealand Cups and Gallops, Harness and Greyhounds, and even a staff employee has a runner in the Greyhound Cup tonight, isn't it? Yeah, tonight. So good luck, KG, with your fantastic little dog. So great to be here during Cup Week and having so many visitors. We've got the members of the Rita board, we've got the members of the ELT here as well, and a few sprinkling staff members, and welcome to all of you and other guests and visitors. It's great to have you all here. Today we'll be hearing from CEO John Allen, who will give a sort of a précis of the last 12 months, and then we'll hear from new chair as well, new chair of Rita, Dean McKenzie. He'll come up after John. So, and there's a chance for questions at the end as well. We've left a segment open for questions, so do feel free to ask them from the floor. So if something comes up in your mind during the addresses, do feel free to ask them at the end. And we are live streaming now to various sectors of the industry, so welcome in and thanks for joining us live streaming, which is the big buzzword at the moment. All right, that's enough from me. Let's now introduce CEO of Rita, John Allen.
Kia ora tātou. Just listening to staff talking about the Cup and Show Week this week, I can tell you we're having quite a good week at the New Zealand TAB. That is in part because our colleague on the executive team here, Gary Woodham's horse Spankum, failed to win by just a nose, having gone out as the heavily backed favourite, the New Zealand Trotting Cup. And it's that sort of difference in results that makes the difference between us having a great result or a great week and a not so great week. That's the challenge of a betting business, and the year we're going to talk about now is obviously a year in which we have had some challenges. Can I recognise the Rita board? We're in the middle of a board meeting right at the moment. We've come out of that for this session. I think it's about the 6th time we've got together since the Rita board was established. There is a huge amount of momentum, a huge amount of commitment being demonstrated by the board to getting the new regulations in place, getting the new legislation in place to lay the foundations for the future of our industry. And Dean is going to have a chat about that in a little while. Can I recognise Glenda as the chair of the New Zealand Racing Board, obviously the chair through much of the year under review. It's very good to see you here and your new guys as chief executive of Greyhound Racing New Zealand. Can I recognise Bernard here as chief executive of Thoroughbred Racing and others. I saw a contingent from the Waikato who'd travelled specifically to hear from Dean on these important subjects. I saw Dennis Ryan was here. There's a range of folk. Look, it's very, very good to have you here. We are going to provide time for questions, so these comments are going to be brief. You know that the annual report has been distributed. It was meant to be sent to those of you that had indicated you were going to be here through the ether yesterday, so hopefully you've had a chance to consider that and to think about questions that you might want to pose to us. The year under review has been a year in which, in my view, the team have delivered real results. Now, I know the financial results, and I'll come to that in just a second, but in terms of laying the foundations for the future of the industry, which is what the Rita board are charged with doing and what we all want to see, this 18-19 year will, I believe, be regarded as a turning point. And the reason for that is that in this year we completed 2 major projects. A project to introduce a new fixed odds betting platform in partnership with Paddy Power Betfair and with Scientific Games Digital, and in partnership with Sony, the reinvigoration of our outside broadcast capability. Now, those two projects are fundamental to the future of this organisation and to the future of our industry. The betting, because without it, we simply did not and would not have a competitive offering, and we would continue to lose customers. We would continue not to be able to provide our customers with the betting experience they could get in other places around the world, and we would not be able to deliver the sorts of features that we know can add value to their experience, add value to our business, and increase distributions to the industry. So that is a significant completion in the course of the year, and I want to recognise the Rita team for the effort, for the commitment, for the passion that was put into delivering it. Because I can tell you something, it's no mean feat to deliver a major technology platform of that kind. It is not for the faint-hearted, and the team did a fabulous job. In terms of the outside broadcast, it's all about showcasing our product, making sure that in this new higher definition world, when everything's being streamed, everything's being digitised, we are demonstrating the quality of New Zealand racing to international and domestic audiences. We know that without pictures, people won't bet. We know if we have great pictures, we can engage the community around racing. So two fundamentally important projects delivered in the course of the year, and I am unashamedly saying that those projects will be significant to the future of the industry, and I'm proud of having achieved them. Now, I know that the reality for most is that the numbers that we targeted, we didn't hit. And so I know that the 136.7 profit before distribution number is below last year and miles below our budget. The reasons for that, I think, have been reasonably well explained in conversations with the industry over the last few months. But I just want to summarise those reasons now and then talk about why, in my view, that is a one-off result that will not be repeated. So the reasons for the below budget, below last year result are three. In the first half of the year, we were impacted by a number of our elite customers. Those are the large betting Kiwi-based customers who support much of our business, stopping betting. And there were a range of reasons for those people stopping betting. They had actually very little to do with the competitiveness of our offer, but nonetheless, it impacted our profit in the first half. Then in January, we launched the fixed odds betting platform, and that caused a significant disruption for many of our betting customers. What we saw is our active account customer numbers fall from 118,000 at the end of December to 88,000 at the end of January. So that was a significant disruption and obviously had a significant impact on the business. In the second half of the year, the issue was different. In the second half of the year, we were impacted by lower than expected margins, particularly on sports product. And that was driven by results. Not simply, nothing to do with the technology, it was about the results. And we talked a little bit about that when I was starting with the impact of results on our Cup and Show Week thus far. If I just take one example, the Joshua Ruiz fight. Some of you remember that boxing fight that Ruiz won. That result cost us millions of dollars. So the impact of a single result can be very significant. So those were the three reasons that we had a lower than expected performance last year. Now, the critical thing for you to understand is that this year, in the first quarter, elite punters are back and are betting up a storm. So that is really good news for us, for this business, and for our industry. In terms of customers, our active account customers per month are back up to 127,500 at the end of October. So that's back up to pre-launch and beyond pre-launch levels. More importantly, or as importantly, our Net Promoter Scores. So this is a survey we do every month to test the engagement of our customers, how gluey they are, whether they're out there promoting the New Zealand TAB and its technology. Our Net Promoter Score in the last few months has just gone back up to the levels that we had again before we launched and beyond those. So this is extremely encouraging, given that that was the challenge at launch time in January. And then thirdly, the margin story. We have seen in the first quarter of this year margins revert to where we would expect them to be. So the margins at the moment are running at about 16.3% as at the end of October, and that has had a significant benefit in terms of our trading performance over that time. So whereas we had those challenges last year, we are not seeing those challenges this year. Even more impressively, what we've seen is that we can now use the new technology to better target customers and stimulate customers with products and with promotions. And the Rugby World Cup is a great example of that. We had a very, very successful Rugby World Cup. We did a $32.9 million turnover, so it was the biggest sporting event we've ever done. We did $7.5 million of GBR off that turnover. So that is a very, very significant result. A lot of that was driven by our try-time promotion. I don't know how many people, I won't ask for hands up for people who put some bets on the try-time promotion. There'll be heaps of you, I know, because 21,500 people were in there and they placed 150,000 bets. That try-time promotion generated 20% of the turnover on the event. That's extraordinary, because that's not a bet type that we would necessarily or previously have expected to drive that sort of turnover. So what we know is with this technology, we can stimulate demand. We can influence customer behaviour. And so the reason I'm here confident about the future and confident about the investments that we made is not simply because we're ahead of budget and ahead of last year after the first quarter. That is true, and therefore on target to achieve our $165.8 million profit for this year. But more importantly, because the technology is working. We saw that in the Melbourne Cup. I mean, that was an extraordinary result in the Melbourne Cup. There wasn't a glitch. There was an early morning tweet went out from somebody saying, oh, get your bets on early because the TAB technology always collapses. And a few people got on about that, you know, as they are wont to do in the internet world, the Twitter world. Of course, the technology did not collapse. The technology didn't stop. The technology didn't stop when we were doing 39,000 concurrent bets. It didn't stop when we were doing 110 bets per second. So, you know, we were under real pressure. The technology works. So the technology works. The customers are getting engaged. The results are coming in. There's so much more that we can do now that we've got that technology that, in my view, notwithstanding the challenges of last year, notwithstanding a recognition that the results are not what we expected or what we wanted or what we needed, in my view, we can and should be confident about the future of our industry, in part because of the corrections that we've seen and the opportunities that the investments create, in large measure because of the efforts of the board and the minister to create the new legislative foundation going forward. This is an extraordinary industry. As you know, this is my last presentation as CE. And I just want to recognise, in closing these comments, the incredible potential of this industry. I believe in it. I believe in the people who are part of it. I have met some extraordinary people in the course of my time here. The passion and the commitment and the pride is incredible. The contribution to New Zealand is incredible. And I want to close by saluting my team, saluting the people of Rita and the people of New Zealand racing, and wishing you all the very best for the future.
Thanks, John. When you go, your enthusiasm will surely be missed. I miss those impassioned speeches that he gives once a year to the AGM, but we see him on a monthly basis, and he's just as enthusiastic with the staff as he is with the guests we have here today. And it is infectious. And where are you going?
Just going over to see the CFO for a second.
Oh, okay. He's just come up with an idea and he just wants to work it out now. But yeah, we will miss John and his enthusiasm, and you don't always agree with him, but his door's always been open to us to go and challenge him, go and discuss with him, and he's more than happy to do all of that. So go well, John, and thanks for, on behalf of the staff, thanks for everything over the last half a decade. It's as long as that. Now I'd like to invite the chair of Rita, the first time he's spoken at an AGM, Dean McKenzie. Come on up.
I need notes, so I'm different to John, you may have noticed. And B, I was stupid enough to amend the agenda for me to speak after John and not before him, which I think this is about the third or fourth occasion I've actually done this, and I still haven't learnt that you don't follow someone like John when you have to come to a podium. But anyway, I will do my very best. But yep, certainly like to echo staff's comments on John. He's been very professional and an extremely valuable asset for us as a new board. His commitment and energy to the industry is unquestioned, and we do wish him all the very best. So, Godspeed. Right, so some acknowledgements as well as John, also his wider team and the hard-working staff members that we have, because we've had a very eventful first 4 or 5 months in the chair, so to speak. And of course, before that, the team have worked through the wider ramifications of a reform process in a change environment, and any of us who's ever been involved in those understands that that creates uncertainty, and without their hard work, we wouldn't be achieving the results that John has already outlined today. So thank you. Also thanks obviously to my boss, the Minister, who's been a pleasure to work with him and his office through the process, and we've had many interesting conversations along the way, and we're not done yet obviously, and we'll touch on some of that progress and some of the remaining, I won't call them hurdles, that's been negative, challenges that we have to go through the completion of the reform process. But certainly the industry, I think, is widely acknowledging the efforts that the Minister has put into reforming the industry. And we're talking generational reform. And when you're talking generational reform in anything, it takes time and it's not easy. And without key people like the Minister in place, it's virtually impossible. So I'd like to acknowledge his assistance. Obviously, the board, my fellow board members who have abandoned me and sat in the audience for today's occasion. Mr. Vella wanted to come and sit at the front, but I said to him that he's best to sit in the audience. But thank you guys for all your efforts. I know we've had an extremely busy work agenda over the last few months, and unfortunately for us, it's not going to get any easier as we go through the remainder of the reform program. But thank you. So where are we at? I've concentrated my part of today's session on obviously the reform process from the. Can people see that? Turn out the lights. Drop the lights. Sorry, we need the lights for the camera shot. No, we don't need the lights for the camera shot. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. This HD's hardly ideal when you've got a face for radio. Yeah, so that looks a little bit better. So the reform process, I know everyone knows the major mechanics of the reform process, going back to, even to April last year when John was appointed by the Minister to review the industry and prepare his report. But that certainly gives a bit of a picture as to the major steps along the way. And obviously the board and I got involved in the process when we were appointed to the advisory committee last year. So we've probably been in the reform sphere, if you like, for around 12 months now. And it's been a very eventful 12 months. And I believe as a team, and I include the Rita executive in that, I include the wider codes, I include the DIA, I include the Minister's Office, and I include, most importantly, the government, that we've actually achieved a great deal in that period of time. When you consider the last piece of industry reform was you would consider would be the 2003 Racing Act. And here we are, the Minister's Reform Program, which was included into announced in the interim MAC report in the early part of the year. We've looked to undertake two pieces of substantial reform in 1 year, and you're getting to that level of effort and commitment, without the government on board and the Minister's Office fully engaged in that process, and without everyone playing their part. And I'm talking about the codes and DIA. We've had an excellent relationship with the people from the Department of Internal Affairs who have assisted us through the project, and we're very appreciative of that, because we just wouldn't be at the state that we are now to ensure that we're on the pathway. So pretty much Rita came into existence out of that first reform bill, as again I'm probably repeating a lot that we all know, but our chairs effectively were filled from the 1st of July this year, so we effectively had our first meeting on the 11th of July. So pretty much we were appointed late June. I think we all found out late June that we were actually officially appointed by Cabinet onto the new board. We took our seats early in July and pretty much met straight away. Now, first order of business and first challenge we had was actually trying to ensure that while the change and the transition was going on, that the industry wasn't going backwards. So, because there's a whole lot of complex issues that we're dealing with, and that we're all dealing with, the codes and Rita and the wider industry. So at the same time, we had to make sure that we had the resources and the direction to go forward and create a positive and rewarding pathway to go forward with. So our first order of business was to ensure that we at least retained the same existing distributions to the code. So that was very much one of the first orders of business. And effectively that set the bar as to the challenge that we had in front of us over the next few months, which is one of the aspects of our time as a board that has proved challenging for a whole lot of the reasons that John has outlined. But I think by the time we've got to where we've got to now, we're very, very optimistic that the right platform is in place. The first quarter results, I think, clearly show that the business is stabilising and going in the right direction, and the indications that the board are seeing as recently as this morning in our latest update, which is very, very near the numbers that are here today, but even into November, we are cautiously optimistic, and I use those words of the rule around the board table is no fluff, and the fact is that we are cautiously optimistic that the results that are flowing through the business now are clearly point that it's heading in the right direction. So since July, one of the main aspects of where we've got to and where we're going was formed by the Minister's Letter of Expectation, and there's probably a few in the audience that are probably a bit tired of me referring to the Letter of Expectation. The Letter of Expectation is the Minister's writing instructions, or driving instructions if you like, to the board as to the priorities that we were to be undertaking and the rules that we were to be engaging in, and the outcomes that we were expected to achieve. So one of those was maintaining the code distributions that I've already referred to, and one of them was one of the most important ones was referring to the balance sheet was to be stabilised, and I think the exact words were not to be deteriorated further, or something of those lines. So the writing instructions effectively set up the pathway for us to start managing the business going forward, and in conjunction with that was the remainder of the reform program that flowed out of the first bill. So out of the first bill, you'll see and know of a number of things that came out of that. So the strategy from the whole team, and I again refer to that context, for the reform process was we looked to put as much additional revenue into that first part of the reform process. So in that first bill that went before the House in June, it got passed in June, the Racing Reform Act, there was the offshore betting charges, which the point of consumption tax and the betting information use charges. There was the repeal of the betting levy, or as it came back, the subsequent gradual repeal of the betting levy, and there was some other aspects around increasing opportunities in the sports betting arena. So that first bill, and of course it formed Rita, yes it did, but the overall context was, and the key word for clarity is the word transition. It was setting up the transition year, and I think the Minister even yesterday referred to it in his press release regarding today's annual report announcement in AGM. So we're in the middle of the transition year. So Rita setting up our existence as if everything goes well, you won't be seeing me at next year's AGM because our job will have been done. The TAB NZ will have been constituted from the 1st of July in the terms of the second bill, and where the industry is on its designated pathway based on a successful outcome of the reform program. So just on the additional revenue, because I've often found it's a lot easier to solve problems when you've got some additional money coming in the front door. So one of the focuses that we've had is obviously the betting information use charges and the point of consumption regulations. So the legislation in the first bill set up the platform for us to instigate these new revenue streams. There is ongoing work that's involving all the codes, sport, the Department of Internal Affairs and our own teams to put the regulations around that, to get that in place, to really kick those new revenue streams into gear from 2020. The good news is that we've already got 80% of the online market captured under voluntary agreements. So the team have just, I prefer to Australia being our main market, of course, but that's right, 80% of the Australasian market. But the important factor is that we've had two concurrent work streams working, the regulatory work stream to get the actual mechanics of it working, but we've also, the team here under Andy Kidd have been very vigilant ensuring that the voluntary agreements where we can put them in place are in place, and that revenue is already starting to flow. So we're not sitting around on our hands waiting for things to happen. We're trying to do things as expediently as we can, and that goes all the way back to that early principle of ensuring that the majority of the revenue opportunities, new revenue opportunities that the industry had, would go into that first bill and be done and dusted as early as possible. So of course the other aspect of that was the totalisator duty, the repeal of the betting levy. That came out obviously where it's repealed over a 3-year period. We've certainly at the moment ring-fenced that has not as yet started to flow back out to the industry. It is flowing into the Rita balance sheet. Rita have ring-fenced that money and it will be distributed to the industry. There's some aspects around that still we're waiting for clarification on. So I refer specifically to the regulations around distribution. There's ongoing work streams with the codes on distribution, and we're also waiting for, there's a harm minimisation. An extremely important part of that is a harm minimisation component, which is also yet to be determined. So we're not spending it, it's not going into a black hole, it's going into the balance sheet, awaiting the confirmation of those things to enable us to distribute that as new revenue streams out to the industry. So that's some of the things that have fallen into that first bill. I mean, we've got Section 16. We've got we had the completion of the Section 14 audit, because all these things come back to those 17 recommendations that are from the Masara review that we referred to right at the start. So effectively, the way our board runs our business at our board meetings at a governance level is we have two sessions. We have a change session and we have a business as usual session. So the change session is specifically tagged to the 17 actual recommendations that John Masara made in his review, and we track every one of them as we go through that change session. And optimistically, the change sessions are starting to get, what's the word? Come on, jump in. They're starting to get shorter, and there's starting to be more clarification around some of those key things that we're still working on, like integrity, like the new wagering products that will hopefully be flowing out of the second bill and those types of things. So that's how the board has designated its time, because clearly the workload of the Rita board managing not only the BAU but also the reform program is a substantial workload, and one that has needed careful management by both the executive team in reporting to our board, and obviously the board as we've managed through that process. So pretty much the focus for the next fiscal year. Thankfully, we've had a really positive foundation to start planning a lot of this next phase. But things remain the same. We're a transition body. We're here for a year. Things don't change. The foundation is laid, but our work streams and our priorities and objectives are very much the same. Obviously leading and completing the change reform process. I said to someone the other day that I think we're probably 65% of the way through the reform process. There's still some challenges for us to go, and I'll touch on that towards the end of my presentation. But we've done the hard yards. Yes, there's hard yards to go, but we've done a lot of the hard yards as an industry. I'm not saying as a board, as an industry, to get where we've got to today, to put us on the... But there is light at the end of the tunnel, as I think John's alluded to in his address. Driving revenue, again, I think you can solve a heck of a lot of problems when you've got more money to solve them with. So a huge amount of focus that our board has is generating these new revenue streams at the same time as looking for new ways to do things just as well, but more efficiently. And I think the combination of those two things, there's no secret that we've had liquidity and challenges around our balance sheet. So to manage the change reform program in the context of those challenges that are referred to in, both in the letter of expectation and in the address that John has had, and I've also mentioned, is an ongoing challenge and something that bears very close monitoring. But it's something at this point that we believe we're heading in the right direction on. And lastly, there's building trust and the extension of the harm minimisation program in the last few months that the Rita team, executive team, have put together, and the wider team here is exceptional, and currently have 11 individual initiatives underway to ensure that we continue to build trust as a qualified and best-in-class gaming operator. So, I'll try and wrap it up. I think I'm just about probably out of time. Kate's nodding. So there's a final slide that we've got that I think probably a lot of questions or a lot of... we're in that phase now where, okay, what's happening with the second bill? We've heard all this Bill 1 stuff. What's happening with the second bill? So this slide here looks to clarify, and we're very close obviously to the start of that. So I'd like to think there's some certainty around that, but in politics I haven't been around it long, but I've been around long enough to know that certainty is probably not a word you would use, but it's certainly the expectation of the Minister that the second bill will be in the House before Christmas. So that dictates the remainder of that time frame. 4 month select committee process, hopefully with the second bill being passed in June, and as I referred to earlier, that being enacted for 1 July 2020. So that's kind of where we're at. Obviously through that process there's a number of things in that second bill, and the Minister even referred to a couple of them in his press release yesterday around our performance for this year and challenges for next year. So a lot of those things will start to evolve once we get direction from government as to where they've landed on those issues that will be covered in that second bill. So, but I think by the timeline there, I think you can have comfort that the reform program is on target, and that the Minister will successfully deliver the required reform in the template and the time frame that he envisaged the reform program to be delivered in at the start of the year, which I think is an exceptional effort for, as I say, everyone involved in that process. So they're not the only challenges we've got, obviously, as an industry. It's certainly fair to say that our licence to operate, our social licence, is one that is of particular focus at the moment for all of us, and the codes have done some exceptionally good work on this in recent months and years, but that obviously is just something that is going to be ongoing and, if anything, obviously increase in its importance. So it remains a very central part of what we all will need to do as an industry and as a team over the coming months and coming years, because it's not something that we will all of a sudden get. It'll be something that we need to continually work on as society evolves. So that's certainly something that's very much at the forefront of board discussion at the present time. So that's probably where I'll end it. I'd like to certainly acknowledge at the completion of this address formally the assistance that we've had from the codes, from the industry, from the Minister's Office, from the Department of Internal Affairs, and from all stakeholders to ensure that the reform program is where it is, and there is a lot of individuals and organisations that have contributed to getting that reform program on target, and I can assure you that our organisation will be doing everything we can to ensure that that is delivered on time and the outcomes and benefits from that are what we all hope they will be. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. The first chair to insist on mood lighting for his address. But I did dial into the YouTube. I was concerned that the viewers who are both watching live and will tune in later wouldn't be able to see you, but credit to the camera ops and the editors, you still came through clear as a bell. So question and answer time is pretty self-explanatory. You ask questions. We do have the Rita board here. We have the bulk of the executive leadership team here as well, if it needs to extend that far. So you ask the questions, they'll provide the answers. We have 2 roving mics. So if you just raise your hand, and we've got Kim and Emily either side of the room, and they'll come to you with a mic. And if I could just get you to preface with who you are and where you're from. So Ken Rutherford, Waikato Racing, just so the viewers know who you are, even though we all know who you are, Ken. I don't need to be a traffic cop and guide all this. It should be quite guidable. So I might just get you guys to come up here, because otherwise you'll just be shuttling backwards and forwards because we don't know who's going to be asked of the question. So it's always a big challenge, and I always like to provide a prize, which I'm not this year. First question goes to... Come on, it's live television, sort of. Oh, we could wrap it up then. Oh no, here we go. So we'll just get a microphone to you. You're not going to answer it? No, I'm not answering it.
Afternoon all. My name is Bernard Hickey. I'm the president of the New Zealand Thoroughbred Owners Federation. Firstly, John, I wish to express your enthusiasm over the years you've been here, and I wish you all the best in the future. Right, through the chair. I have previously provided these questions to the chair. I thought it was transparent that any questions I was to ask, I would provide it in writing to you. I've already provided you these questions. The opportunity now has arose that I've now seen the financial accounts, and once one sees that and sees our equity, which has dropped considerably, and also sees that our indebtedness is increased. So the questions I had originally put forward are still relevant, and I'll read them out. There are 3 questions. The first one is a double barrel one. What is the amount of the external debt that was incurred by NZ Racing Board and continues through Rita? And what further debt has been incurred by Rita? Now, once you answer that, follows on, what are the terms and conditions of that borrowing, and what is the impact of those terms and conditions on future distributions to the codes and consequently on the stakes?
We'll probably have to tandem on this. It's the same as in the balance sheet. So what's in the balance sheet is current debt. So I think that's 35. So there's been no additional debt. So the Rita board is managing the business on the existing facilities that were in place when we took the business over. So there'll be, like any business, there'll be revolving credit that we use. The way the cash flow on the business works is the first half of the year, or certainly the middle 2 quarters, the distributions to the codes in that time exceed the cash flow into the business. So there is a need to manage that through that period. But other than that, the Minister's letter of expectation is very clear that the balance sheet, as I already referred to, is to be stabilised and not deteriorated any further. So there is not envisaged to be any additional debt incurred by the organisation through this fiscal year.
Thank you. Second question is, what stops Rita from releasing comprehensive weekly TAB turnover figures to the total industry with an appropriate comment as deemed to be required, including comment on relative margins for the various components of those weekly statistics?
Turnover's not as relevant as it was under the complete parimutuel or tote-based system that we have historically had. You know, turnover was very important because there was a standard deduction. As the business has moved towards a hybrid model with a fixed odds component and a parimutuel component, obviously that starts to get a lot more complex, and obviously gross betting revenue or net betting revenue that come out the bottom is more important than what, in a lot of ways, not completely, but in a lot of ways what goes in the top. So in the context of that, the issue with displaying all of that publicly is that we work in a competitive environment. So effectively what we would be doing is telling all our competitors what margins we were making on various major events and on a weekly basis that you've given. So we would show, for example, the impact of Melody Bell probably being beaten in the best run of her life at the weekend, because someone could pretty much work that out from the GBR numbers that we would supply. So market-wise, and John may want to add to these comments, but market-wise it wouldn't be prudent for our industry and you guys as stakeholders for us to discuss that in that type of framework.
The only other comment I'd make there is that we do provide weekly analysis to the codes. So codes do get the weekly analysis of betting activity.
I understand that, John, because I do receive them. So.
Cool.
Finally, what contractual agreements does NZRB include with other parties which Rita includes inhibiting the immediate digitalisation of outsourcing New Zealand TAB operation, as was strongly recommended in the Zara report?
There's nothing inhibiting us looking at outsourcing, so that's a pretty simple reply. But to add some further background to that, there is ongoing work in the outsourcing space with regards the analytical work that's required to evaluate it, and certainly we're waiting for some guidance in a couple of areas from the Minister's office at the moment, and inclusion of the second bill. So we should be in a better position to understand the pathway that needs to be taken. Whether that is or isn't taken, we still have to, as an industry, know what that pathway looks like. So that's what we're doing at the moment, but I can assure you there is nothing inhibiting us looking at outsourcing.
Just a final comment to make a comment going forward. I think people in the industry right across, there's a lot of people work with owners, traders, readers, and also those people who invest. I think all we're asking for is honesty, and for the current Rita board to be upfront, tell it as it is, and be factual on what you provide. I think if you do that going forward, then we'll gain the integrity of the industry, and we'll move forward as an industry.
Yeah, I think I've already referred to it. No fluff. So with John's result, John's presentation was specifically targeted towards telling the industry where we are now. So that's the quarterly results, which first quarter is August, September, October. So that quarter's only just finished. So to enable the industry to be completely updated as to where we are currently, we believe that there was more value in outlining that to the industry than the previous fiscal year.
I'm pleased we're moving in the right direction, and that will assist NZTR and purposes of objectives. Thank you.
Anybody else? Just wait for the microphone.
Michelle can hear.
Yeah. Michelle Saber, Auckland. I'm a breeder, punter, journalist, whatever. I'm just interested in what percentage of the turnover every year comes from on-course betting.
Not a material amount in the context of a business that generates 300 and something million. But it's certainly in the context of the business, still very important.
Right, okay. And what are you going to do, or what does the board...
2%. I was going to guess 5%, so I would have been wrong. But yeah, so it's but that's where you get into the context of it's just not a money game. We need to ensure that we're growing the future generations of our industry, and that's where you spiral into that argument or that discussion around on-course turnover and the importance of producing an on-course product.
Right, okay. And are you going to do anything endeavouring to do anything to improve your on-course facilities? For example, the tote systems that we have in the Auckland area are abysmal, and I'm sure all the racing clubs in this area and all the racing clubs around the country suffer from the same problems. Is this something that you'll look forward to doing now that you've fixed the other sides?
In the context of getting back to the holistic view of the industry, one of the key directives of the Masara review, as we are all aware, was the relook at venues and how best we put our resources into those venues that will drive the industry forward in the right direction. So I think in that context, with the government, supporting the Masara review in principle, I think you've got some comfort that there's a direction going where naturally facilities at those venues have to be better. I mean, we've all probably been to Randwick or the like, or Rose Hill, where those venues are exceptionally good, Menangle, and that's certainly something that as an industry we need to focus on, and we've actually got the platform to do it now.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for you brave questioners. Always good to have some questions. Thanks to Dean and John for your addresses, and again thanks to John for your service over the last 5 years. I think we have some light refreshments, is that right? And you can have a mingle and a chat, and if there's any external Rita people who would like a copy of the annual report, Kate over there, who's kindly wore a very bright pink top, so she's easy to find. She's got just a few of copies of the annual report. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being here live in Petone. Really looking forward to the next 3 quarters of what so far is an awesome year. So have a great day.